it'd be amazing to actually see like blueprints of SPDs across the country and how they compare to the images that you even see in the Amy standard book. Because after the fact, there's been so many times I've worked at facilities and I'm like, who built this place? Like, who did you guys consult to make the sterile storage area of all places? Because it's never enough space.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now, turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Candice Kauffman, SPD Manager at UC Health in Colorado. And Hank, this week we're going to be talking about regulatory compliance as it relates to sterile storage. And Candice, I don't think, has really participated in any of the Beyond Clean content yet. She's going to be a first-timer on the episode, but you're going to fall in love with her right away.
Yeah, she may be first to the podcast, Justin, but she's actually a member of the Beyond Clean advisory group that we just launched this summer. So that's kind of cool. It's exciting to have one of our advisory group members on the show with us to represent. And also on this topic, it's kind of close to my heart because of the consulting that I've done in the past. Regulatory compliance is one of the number one reason that consultants get brought in. It's one of the number one reasons that hospitals get cited by folks like the Joint Commission and the DNV and Department of Health. If you're going to listen to any episode on this season and you're in your survey window, this is the one to tune in to save yourself some pain. And hopefully, no matter where you are in the life cycle of your department, you're going to learn a couple of things about how to improve your department to that level of a center of sterile processing and sterile storage excellence.
All right, stay tuned. We're going to be right back with Candice Kauffman after a short break. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the 17 studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Candice Kauffman, SPD Manager at UC Health in Colorado, and we are continuing this discussion this season on sterile storage and taking us today to excellence. Candice, we're going to be talking about regulatory compliance. So, scary. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. And this is definitely one of my favorite topics, so I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, we're excited to have you. And I can tell right away you're going to be a lot of fun on this episode. And, I think Hank and I are trying to lighten things up a little bit and enjoy these interviews more on the Beyond Clean podcast lately. Hopefully it's entertaining for the audience and not just entertaining me. But
at the very least, we're going to be entertained, Outside of that, you can decide.
So, Candice, why don't you just tell everybody who you are? I mean, you said that you love this topic, so tell us why you love this topic.
Yes, I've been in the SPD industry for 6 years now, and in that 6 years, I've done a lot of moving and grooving in the industry. So one of the crazy things about compliance, right, is that it's kind of something that SPD tends to learn on the back end. We've all been in that situation where we learn the hard way, or we were taught incorrectly, and it's not till a surveyor comes in and you get dinged on something and all of a sudden the whole process changes. And that's just one of those uncomfortable truths about our industry, that getting on the forefront of that compliance issue and making sure that our staff is educated and they can speak to those things, that's where my passion lies. So that's what keeps me driven in SPD. And I love sharing that knowledge.
So you're 6 years in and you're managing. I don't want to let that point pass, right? Because there's going to be some folks who are like, Oh, wow. Like, how did that happen? So can you just take a moment and like say, like, what was your career journey to this state?
Yeah, absolutely. I started off as a baby tech at a hospital, had no idea what SPD was. Had a friend in the industry that was like, hey, we're short-staffed, we need help. At the time, I didn't know that was like an ongoing theme in the industry.
Yeah.
Ongoing and exacerbating.
Yeah. Exactly. So I actually went and shadowed, and I had never heard of sterile processing before. So it was a completely new world to me, and I loved how intricate it was. So I worked at a hospital that unfortunately ended up being one that went down the wrong compliance road and ended up on the news. And I had actually jumped ship prior and went the surgery center route. So I worked at private surgery centers and, tried to do my part as a little baby tech saying, wait, you're not supposed to flash stuff. And, in the surgery center world, that's like completely asinine because we only have 3 sets. Of course, we're flashing things. So it became very clear to me at that point that like, wow, there's a lot of moving pieces that like not everybody knows this. Like you work in the industry and not everybody understands that this is how you're supposed to do it. And ultimately, I ended up working with a physician group that opened an eye surgery center. So I went along with them, helped them open the surgery center. And then ended up at the biggest healthcare system in Colorado as an educator and realized that just wasn't enough for me. I love the leadership and the mentorship. So as soon as a manager position opened up, I went for it. And here I am.
What a crazy 6 years. That's a lot to jam into 6 years of sterile processing.
Yeah.
That's a perfect setup, though, for an episode on compliance, because I try to hit this hard in the industry through articles and through other interviews and stuff that I've given about, if your hospital hits the news, that's one thing. Like, no one wants our hospital to hit the news. But the real scary part and the real truth is most of our hospitals would hit the news if people knew everything that was going on that shouldn't be going on in our facilities. Like our jobs as managers, educators, even frontline technicians is to figure out what we're not doing right and fix it. But almost everybody, if they're honest with you, will say, yeah, we've got areas of noncompliance that if JACO or Department of Health or just the journalist down the street knew what was going on, it would probably make the front page tomorrow. In that context, let's talk about, yes, compliance around sterile storage, but let's all be honest with ourselves that if we really look close enough, we're probably going to find some noncompliance in our areas and try to encourage folks, even through this interview, to walk away with a nugget of truth to say, hey, like maybe we do need to change something in the way that we're doing it today to stay out of the news. Yes. But at the end of the day, to just be safe. Before we get too far in talking about it, what do we mean when we say regulatory compliance? Like who is out there doing the regulating?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, right? Because it's funny when techs know or find out that Joint Commission is on site, everyone tends to scatter. Right. And they turn into this like villain almost in our hero story. And really, at the end of the day, our interactions with the Joint Commission are so minimal that it's really up to leaders in SPD and infection prevention that are really driving that regulatory readiness. We are doing the regulating. The team is doing the regulating. Right. And it's putting those pieces together and helping the team understand, like, you guys you're catching these things all the time, right? You're stopping vendors from doing things they're not supposed to be doing all of the time. So when Joint Commission comes, you just speak to that. You just let them know the part that you play in that.
Yeah, that's so true. Like that phrase kept coming to my mind, like regulate or be regulated. Those are your options. So if you're out there empowering your technicians with the kind of insight and education that we're talking about today, then you get to be on the front end of that and kind of self-regulate instead of on the back end where you scatter and then you realize, oh crap, we should have been doing something that we weren't doing that we probably knew that we should have been doing. And now we have no choice. And in fact, we have like 29 days to get it fixed before they come back kind of situation.
Yeah. Not a good spot to be in.
Yeah. So you mentioned the self-regulation, and then you mentioned at least one of those organizations out there, the Joint Commission. Are there any others that, would be helpful for kind of newer technicians to be aware of that could show up at your hospital to do some kind of regulatory compliance audit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Joint Commission obviously is the most notorious. For a lot of facilities now, mine included, we're servicing clinics. They actually don't report to the Joint Commission. So we're at this crossroads where we're actually being compliant with the state of Colorado in addition. I know that a lot of facilities now, including mine, are looking to cross-train into the GI lab to reprocess scopes. So SG&A, and making sure that we're staying compliant with reprocessing GI scopes. Really, those are to just name a few. If you start going down the infection prevention rabbit hole, how many agencies can actually come in and regulate what we're doing on the infection prevention side, that adds to a whole different can of worms, that challenge of making IFUs mesh, regulatory compliance.
Right.
That's our daily struggle, right? So furthermore, teaching our techs to speak to that stuff.
Yeah, and even groups that you may not see show up in your facility, but have kind of oversight or impact in what's going on there, like the FDA, for instance. So you mentioned IFUs, right? Like all that's driven by the FDA. Well, we have the CDC. Well, you got to be doing something really bad for the CDC to show up at your doorstep. But when the Joint Commission surveyors, when the DNV surveyors, when the Department of Health, as you mentioned, like when all those folks show up, the CDC kind of on their list is at the top of the list, probably even above like the AAMI guidelines or anything like that, AORN guidelines. Like they're looking at CDC first for those like big moments, and then they get down into the nuance. So yeah, that's a great point. So speaking of kind of that, and I kind of already alluded to a couple of these, but in looking at your sterile storage program in the context of excellence, right? We kind of titled this episode Building a Center of Excellence in Sterile Processing. What are the resources that you would advise folks to kind of gather around, to build its library of resources to begin building this excellent sterile storage program?
Yeah, it'd be nice if it was just like a one-size-fits-all template, right? Like, oh, hey, you're opening a hospital. Here you go. This is how it works. And the challenging part is that you have to find at least the common ground amongst all of these different regulatory modalities that require us to ensure we're keeping our patients safe as well as our team safe. So for starters, defaulting to the AAMI guidelines are always a great place to start, but you have to make sure that they can accommodate the facility that you're working at, right? So I've been in hospital settings, surgery center settings. Those are vastly different when it comes to making sure you're at minimum hitting those AAMI guidelines that even give you like a layout and pictures of, hey, your sterile storage should look like this and it should flow this way. And it'd be amazing to actually see like blueprints of SPDs across the country and how they compare to the images that you even see in the AAMI standard book. Because after the fact, there's been so many times I've worked at facilities and I'm like, who built this place? Like who did you guys consult to make the sterile storage area of all places? Because it's never enough space.
It was toddlers. They just enlisted some 3-year-olds to draw some boxes and say, oh, yep, that looks good.
It wasn't to scale. Like their scale was completely off.
So what do you do though? This is a really great point. We have these drawings in the AAMI guidelines that give us this blueprint, right? And then for some reason, that's not what we get. And so how do you make it work? I think that's kind of like, I realize that's not totally regulatory, but it has a big impact on it because you're trying to make something fit a construct that's not ideal, and regulatory is going to kind of hold you to the ideal in a lot of cases. So, how do you navigate that? Yeah,
for sure. It's looking at pros and cons and making tables, right, of things we have control over. An easy one is even looking at, that bottom shelf of storage. Do you have a cover over it, right? You're going to get dinged on that one every single time. So even if you have space constraints, get the cover on the bottom shelf. That's a low hanging fruit, right? If you have the ability to make sure.
And if you don't, you just put it on the floor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
Just lower it all the way down.
Just put it right on the floor. Use a piece of cardboard.
Yeah. Touche. Well done. Well played.
This is not regulatory advice. I want to put like a little asterisk on these comments here. We are kidding. Okay. Do not say.
In the last 1 minute, this is not advice.
They said on Beyond Clean that we could do this. Yeah.
Scratch that one out.
Yeah.
Somebody out there who does not understand sarcasm is in trouble right now.
So that's just a great point, though, again, on we're given those constraints, as you said, and we've got to make the best of them. But you don't want to use the constraints as an excuse not to do the low-hanging fruit. So I'm so excited that you went there, because it can be, I don't know if this is the right phrase, but like not seeing the forest for the trees kind of thing is like, we know, oh yeah, like we don't have enough space, and therefore we're just going to compromise on everything. Like we're not going to have bottom covers. We're not going to be doing X. We're not going to be doing Y. So yeah, that list, I think you said kind of pros and cons list of what can we control and control all of that. And then once you get down that list, then start those kind of harder conversations around facilities and size and, flow and control in that room. Like those are things that you can get there, but you don't want to get there until you've X'd everything else off.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even at my facility now, it's so silly when you look at it. My sterile storage sits in a little nook. So where they built my office and where they built the locker room sits on both sides of the sterile storage. And then it jets out into this little like cubby hole. So it allows me to have like 2 shelves to store sterile items. And I'm like, why? Why did we do that? But we have no control over the layout of the walls at this point. So we have to get creative with how we put the shelves in there and what we're putting on those shelves and, how we can angle the shelves and make as much space as we can to properly store items.
All right. So there are some things that we aren't in control of, but amongst the list of things we can control, what are the really big ones that they're really almost inexcusable, right? These are the can't miss ones. This isn't critical thinking, navigating, the situation. These are the non-negotiables.
Yeah, I think an easy one is the stacking of trays, especially the ones in blue wrap, right? We all fight that fight on a regular basis with holes in wrap, and we're not doing ourselves any justice if we're not setting up our sterile storage to eliminate that problem. So for me, that's definitely at the top of the list. And then, going down from there, that top shelf storage, we all use and abuse that way too much than we probably should. So making sure that you're creating a realistic storage plan too, right? So a solution is not to generate more problems and stack everything on the top shelf, which tends to be a common theme as well. One of my other favorite ones is making sure that we can create a storage that is sustainable for long term as well. I've worked at a couple facilities where they're like, well, we'll just put a rack right here in the middle of the SPD because we have plenty of vendor trays. Okay, well, A, it's a fire hazard. B, like now we can't unload the cart washer. So that's not going to work. So, long-term solutions and making sure that when you make these adjustments, that you're still finding that regulatory baseline so you're not just creating more problems down the road.
Okay, so we're going to play a little bit of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but we're going to skip the one in the middle. We're going to go to the small things. What are the details that'll kill you when it relates to sterile storage?
Oh, yeah. I mean, back to, right, not having the proper covers on the right shelves, stacking your trays, that red line that oftentimes is at the top shelf, going above that. Your sprinkler heads, that's another fun one where they often place those in the most inconvenient spots. Of course, we got to be up to code, but it doesn't help us when it comes to sterile storage. Yeah, I think those ones for me are always the ones that if you walk in the department and you see those and you can fix them, you have to. And you have to help the team understand, well, I just set the tray there for just a second. I totally get it. We're all busy, but this is why we have to make sure that we're not allowing this to become a standard.
So let me ask you some softballs. If you want to add some nuance or, stories about them, you can. All right. But these are compliance softballs, so I'm going to stay on theme here. You walk into sterile storage and you see someone strolling through in their street clothes. Is that good or bad?
Oh, gosh. I would definitely look the other way because that's terrible.
Are you looking the other way to find like a weapon to teach them a lesson, or
no? It's definitely the taser.
The taser.
Probably to avoid like projectile vomiting.
That's the first time I think that phrase has ever been used on a Beyond Clean podcast.
Yep, absolutely. Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Okay.
We need to get a list of phrases never used on Beyond Clean and put them in front of our guests. If you can find a way
to work this,
to weave projectile vomiting into the conversation today, we will send you a $25 gift card.
There you go. So let me see if I can get you to say something else crazy. No. So the next softball is, so say that I'm in sterile storage and I'm picking cases and I get hungry. Is it okay for me to pull out like a bag of Doritos and just set it on top of something? Like, let's just say that it has a dust cover, like that's okay in sterile storage, right? As long as it's not directly on the tray.
As long as the indicator has turned. Yeah, no, as much as I wish we could wear like a Camelback and keep a water bottle at all times and a Cliff Bar, no, absolutely not.
Great. Okay. And you already mentioned cardboard. It's a big little one, and that's one that kind of gets missed all the time. And so one of my questions kind of on this, because we talked about this beginning of the interview, that you want to get the big things, and there's some big things that you can't fix. So make sure to check off all the small things. But how would you encourage departments that are out there? They're just looking and they're like, okay, I know we got a lot of problems. How do we make sure that we don't miss the basics, like the big and the small? Like, what would you advise them to do to approach this challenge?
Yeah, I'm always a huge fan of, reverting back to basics, the SPD 101. The amazing part is that we kind of take for granted the longer that we're in the industry that everybody just knows these things. But without that standard level of education required for SPD techs everywhere, we're all learning from different methodologies and different preceptors. And then you add in vendors and outside personnel that are working within our departments that don't understand. That's one of my favorite ones with cardboard, right? Oh, I'm just here to restock the set. It'll just be a second. Like, well, there's no like timeline that it says that I can allow you to have cardboard in here. There's just no cardboard that's allowed in here. And here's why. So really making sure that you're doing your due diligence and getting that why, because once you start to understand the why, it makes it easier to be the bad guy. It also makes it easier for your team to hold visitors accountable. So it's not just a manager job, right, to make sure there's no cardboard. It's a team responsibility. And it's also our responsibility to educate as a team so people understand the why.
Yeah, you brought that up at the beginning of the interview as well. And I kind of want to tie that theme back in, that empowerment piece. This is my house. This is your house, right? So you don't just let anyone just stroll up in your house and start doing things, right? If they work in the operating room, if they're vendors, if they're visitors or whatever, this space has to be protected because of all the workflow that has gone in to creating these sterile goods. The last thing that we want is some numbskull, strolling with cardboard, like you said, or with food and drinks, or without a hair cover. Like, how many times have you seen somebody? I'm guilty of it too, right? So like, I want my staff to stop me if I'm strolling in there without a hairnet on or without a beard cover on now, you're like, hey, dude, chill, turn around, go get your stuff on and come back in. And that's what I want them to do. Like, I want them to stop. But yeah, you're totally right. There's a lot of staff members that can be lulled into thinking, well, that's the manager's job. That's the supervisor's job. Like, I'm just in here to kind of do my thing and I don't want to get into anybody else's business. But that can lead to a lot of non-compliance that the manager never sees, right? Because if they're not in sterile storage when this happens, and that vendor can just think, okay, well, then I can do this. I can unload my trays or like refill my trays, like you said, and it's not a big deal. So yeah, that's a huge piece about that empowerment. So let's switch gears here a little bit and dream. And we haven't done this, I don't think, since maybe Sean Flynn's episode a number of seasons ago when we were talking about building out a brand new department and all the cool things that he would do and has done in his department. But let's focus on sterile storage. I'm just kind of curious, your opinion as a dreamer and a doer out there in the space. Like, if we could just blow it all up and start over again and really think big and unique with existing technology or maybe technology that hasn't been developed yet to help us to hardwire this compliance piece in sterile processing, like, how would you build out your own sterile storage if the money didn't matter, if the technology didn't matter, like you just wanted it to be perfect?
This is like Sims for SPD.
Right,
I love
exactly.
it.
Oh, yeah.
I think just square footage, step one, right, is the square footage for your sterile storage should probably double any square footage that you have set aside for at least your prep and pack side. It's always severely underestimated, and then we're forced to store items in more or less a closet versus a sterile storage area. And there's some pretty cool technology out there when it comes to, shelving units that actually move or slide, where you can actually condense your storage and save some square footage. And those units are pretty cool. The ones that create a single unit of storage for a tray. So it's even got like a little box, where you're putting the tray inside, especially blue wrapped items, with a little door to it. And I haven't got to use them myself, but I've seen them, and every SPD person probably dreams of having those, because then you can't stack your trays, and then it's protected, and it's got a designated spot so you don't lose track and it doesn't go to the wrong place. And if you could utilize all of that technology and that just became standard, that would be a dream for SPDs everywhere.
Yeah, you're painting the picture of a stack-proof world in the future. That would be incredibly ideal. And, we talked about people getting into the department and just kind of having free access and going into sterile storage. And, the OR might do that, but not everybody knows not to drag those trays that are stacked. And especially when you don't have good control over people who are coming and going and kind of pilfering, through the inventory. And that's a huge issue. I'd also say with enough square footage, right? Because you mentioned, putting that rack right in the middle of the room and blocking everything. That's an unfortunate sort of pseudo reality for some people. And I've talked about this. Probably, I may have even mentioned it in another episode this season already, but just having the blending with storage and prep and pack is risky, especially in this world where we're going to have more and more turnover, as we alluded to at the very beginning, right? Lots of new people coming in. There's just more potential for human error. So we have to, as we love to say here at Beyond Clean, hardwiring sterile processing excellence across the continuum of surgical care. So anyway, you've done a very nice job. You have a great personality. Thanks for making this episode both informative and entertaining today, and for being a good sport. Really, thank you so much, Candice.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's been a pleasure. I love the podcast. I love what you guys are doing. And this is how we start to make a difference in the industry. So I appreciate you guys inviting me.
All right. Well, you might be getting more invites, not just to podcasts, but just be on the lookout. We're always looking for people to participate in lots of things that we do, as more and more virtual events, etc. So don't be surprised if you hear from us. Thanks again so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I look forward to it.
That was Candice Kauffman, SPD manager at UC Health in Colorado. And Hank, what a fun interview. And I know you and I keep talking about the same subject, but we're taking different angles on it all season long. And, just some really good tips on the big no-nos, the little no-nos when it comes to sterile storage. And I liked your whole approach. Like, it's cool to walk in with cardboard, right? Like, that's cool. Nice styling there and kind of painting the picture, because I think sometimes that's the hardest thing to do when you're communicating the do's and the don'ts, is not everybody can always really visualize in their mind what that would look like. Right. I mean, obviously with cardboard, yes, but there are a lot of concepts that we talk about on this show, or ideas, but to make them really concrete, you did a really nice job with that. And so did Candice in this interview.
That's right. It's almost like we can get so technical that we don't have any practical good, and we know all the book smarts, but then when it comes into real life, those situations don't trigger for us, like something's not correct here. And that can be that vendor strolling by without the hairnet, that we mentioned, or it can be the cardboard that you mentioned. And so it's important for this season to highlight those connections between the technical and the practical. But the other part of this, Justin, is it's kind of to show people how deep these topics are. Season 14 is the first time that we have done a themed season. So all 8 episodes on the same topic. and we're talking about them, and we're not covering the same ground. Every single episode has a different perspective, different insights, and we're still just going to scratch the surface of sterile processing and sterile storage in 8 episodes. And there's more to go. So like next season, we're going to talk about a whole nother area of sterile processing for a whole nother 8 episodes. But again, we're going to show the industry this is a complex and technical workflow, but it's got to have practical application on the back end, or it's just a whole bunch of books and we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I'll even say this, even if we were having the same conversation, all of our guests have a different perspective because of that complexity.
Right.
So we could literally roll in with the same topic and have a very different conversation on the exact same thing for all those same reasons. And it's also made this kind of an interesting season for us. It's an experiment, but it's an experiment we're doing throughout 2022.
Right.
So I think we're just going to have a lot of fun with these seasons, and it's going to be a nice change of pace. And so I hope everybody kind of gives us some feedback as we go through this first season. And speaking of feedback, if you have any feedback for the show, you can send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. Let us know what you think of the guests that we're bringing on. Who did you really like? Who really inspired you, or you really heard their passion, or maybe you know somebody that would be really great for the show? Like, let us know. But that's going to do it for this week. And as a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or just search for Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast application. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes by downloading our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and review because your feedback is important to the show. And on behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.